This week, Paul and I continue our conversation on building your AppSec program. In the news, Twitter says all 336 million users should change their passwords. Somebody tried to hide a backdoor in a popular JavaScript NPM package, and the evolving developer mindset. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library, on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30.
Welcome everyone to episode 15, our 16th episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I'm excited to be joined by my otherwise clean-shaven co-host, Paul Asadorian.
Hey, thanks, Keith. How are you? What's going on? Excited to be here on Application Security Weekly.
Yeah, it's another great week. It's starting to get beautiful out here in New England, finally. And yeah, we got a lot of cool stuff going on this week, including, of course, Source Boston coming up this week. Paul, I hear your slide deck is almost done at this point.
I actually learned a lot from developing the slide deck. It allowed me the opportunity to reflect on everything I've learned in the past, I would say, year plus, taking our application from where it was at the time all the way to where it is today, and having a plan, for the future, which, well, it's double duty, right? It helps us here at Security Weekly. It helps me understand this whole application security thing, and as it applies to DevOps and Docker containers and orchestrators and all that stuff. So that's nice when anytime projects overlap. But it also, helps our business of podcasting. So I've just, a couple of, I don't know if we have time at the top of the show to talk about it, Keith. I'm anxious to get your thoughts. As I built the presentation, I realized that some of the main takeaways that I certainly learned in the whole process that I probably should have learned earlier on, and I learned by mistake, right? Which I guess is the best way to learn. But the immutability of containers should not be underestimated. And I think that coming from kind of an old school systems, Unix, Linux systems administrator, Windows systems administrator before that, grasping that concept of just like how disposable containers were, like your whole environment is disposable. And I'm like, like back in the day, we'd spend a lot of time building a system on, bare iron, and like we didn't want to break it or tear it down and rebuild it because it was so much work getting there. But to make that such a repeatable process today, and it was just something that was really, once you get that, I think you have a better experience with the DevOps process and such. So that was certainly one of the huge takeaways. Couple that with just how separate your data and your code and even the networking and volumes and storage are from your container process. That also was just like mind-boggling. So like the next part was, okay, how do I actually do development and deployment now is so different from before, and just grasping onto those new concepts certainly takes time. I think the one thing that I need to work on a lot better, and this problem is exacerbated the more automation you have, is managing your secrets. And I think that's really what led to our security incident, which I'll talk about in the talk probably this Thursday on Security Weekly. Thankfully, it was like a no big deal kind of security incident, but a security incident nonetheless, which was great. You know, and no one's immune to security incidents. But I kind of trace that back to in the requirement in need for automation, we neglected like certain security controls, you know, one of those being secrets and API access specifically. And so I can see others falling into that same trap. So it's very much my journey and a lessons learned, which I'm really excited to present. It actually came out better than I really had initially thought. It's hard because you have to submit these like so far in advance, right? You haven't thought through every single aspect of your talk. And now that I have, I was like, this is good. I'm in a good place.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And in fact, I think some of the lessons learned will come, as part of today's show as well for some of the topics we're going to cover. First, though, quick announcement: go to itpro.tv/securityweekly and use the code SecWeekly30 to try a free 7-day trial and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. So, especially if you want to go learn some DevOps processes, I think that's a great place to go. So, actually, this week, Paul, I wanted to talk about working with developers as part of building your AppSec program. And I think that you've hit on some of the things that I wanted to talk about in today's show, which is things like giving the developers the tools to be able to move fast and break things and have that be okay, such as, the immutability of containers. And so to that end, I've had a lot of really good conversations lately. And one of the things that I brought up that I think fits pretty well to security in a DevOps world is security needs to be a little bit like the wind, in that you can't ever really see it directly, but you can see all of the impacts that it has in your organization based on the movement of the trees or the leaves in your yard. And by that I mean, so if a security can get your development team to use Docker containers, suddenly you have a much better opportunity to quickly spin up and spin down development environments. If you can get them to use things like linting or code signing or version control, then suddenly you have rapid feedback loops and the ability to quickly start injecting minor security things into their processes that they don't ever see, but they only experience in a very light way. So to get started, Paul, I actually want to dive a little bit deeper into what you were talking about just now with immutability of Docker containers. Do you want to define that for our audience and then dive into kind of the lessons learned that you've had so far with it?
Yeah, it means that the container ends up being less about the actual finished product and more about the recipe, right? Like if you think about in a food context, I've actually never made this analogy before, but I'm going to give it a go. When you create an awesome dish, right? It's not about the actual physical meal you've created and maybe goes in the refrigerator later. Like that's usually not as, sometimes it's better the second day, but it's more about how you got there, right? To preserve that process of all of your ingredients. And be able to repeat that. So basically, if you're a chef, basically throw away your meals and not care because you can repeat that process so well to create it every time that the finished product almost doesn't matter and can be replaced at any time. And I think that really kind of captures the essence of immutability. And it's such a shift from the way we've traditionally thought about systems and environments. And in fact, it was one of my drivers to implement Docker. I really wasn't even thinking DevOps. I was more thinking Python is a pain in the ass to maintain the environment, and I need a stable environment to create it. So I'm going to use a Docker container because I wanted to spend time and define my environment. And I think that really speaks to the immutability of the resulting container, that it really isn't the container. It's your source code coupled with your operating system configuration, coupled with your applications, coupled with their configurations that makes up. And then when you get a little more complicated, if your application has multiple containers, it's your Compose or Kubernetes definition that defines how to build that environment. And making sure that's right is the essence of it, so that you can throw it away and rebuild it every 10 minutes, every minute if you wanted to.
And so where I think security fits into this analogy is the fact that, in effect, if you've written down the recipe, no matter who the chef is, hopefully they can make that recipe the same way and have it come out almost as good, if not just as good, right? So in that way, I think that when working with development teams, a lot of people say, how are you going to get the developers to implement or consume security as you're introducing it into the environment? And that's hard, right? Because the developers aren't, judged on how secure their application is. They're judged on how usable the functionality is that they're delivering, and that it's drawing more customers to either stay with the product or start using the product as a result of the features you've delivered. And so in a lot of ways, what security needs to do is they need to both implement good practices or good hygiene, as we like to say, without necessarily getting in the way of the launch or the release cycle. And so I think that in a DevOps world, security has a real opportunity to put forward things like Docker containers, because now if it's all about building the recipe, well, if you can build the recipe securely, in this case, being able to get the containerization and get the different containers talking to one another inside of that network securely, and again, you now have a repeatable build process and a repeatable delivery process, it suddenly makes development's life a lot easier because they don't have to worry about, building that fragile environment and making sure that it works all over the place and doing all of these other things. They can just kind of build it once and launch it every minute if they really wanted to.
You know what the like inherent like awesome thing about the whole process is that every time you build this environment in most script, and this is something like security people, I believe still play a large role in this, but every time you rebuild that environment, which could happen every minute, that you're updating to the latest operating system in all your applications. I mean, we talk about Equifax was just like the shining example of how I'm like, wow, we likely will never have a specific problem like that because every time we do a push to QA or, every other time or whatever, there's a regular cycle where we essentially are upgrading all of our components, right? We're upgrading the application processes, whether that be your web server or your application server. We're updating all the libraries, and we're testing it on our application on those new versions as we go. And that may fail a build process, but that could be because, well, that library was updated and I need to go change a function call. Okay, I'll make that change. I'll re-push. Rather than waiting a year and going, well, I've built thousands and thousands of lines of code that I have to go through to make that change. By the way, when you scale this out, if that library changes, now a dozen developers have to go through respectively their thousands and thousands of line of code to get it in line with that new library. And now you're talking about 6 months to a year just for that one small change. Whereas if every time you're rebuilding the environment, you're catching these as you go, to me, that's just inherently a huge win for security right there.
Right. And so to that end, it's a situation where as a security team, it's not even necessarily that you're giving the developers security tools. You're giving them good processes, good habits, good enablers that allow them to break things and fix them quickly. And then it also, in a way, it gets them used to the fact that builds will break, right? Like on occasion, they will write bad code, build will break, and they'll have it sent back to them for a fix. So they're used to that process. And now suddenly, if you start inserting security as part of that process and it breaks builds based on bad libraries, for example, and then suddenly you're following along with things that they are already used to. And therefore, it's not seen as an interruption to their day-to-day.
Right.
And so to that end, it's almost like in a modern development culture, the few things that you should do is first look for tools that will allow you to configure on behalf of your development team that build process to some degree, right? Not necessarily all of it, but at least part of it. And then the other side of it is looking at ways that you can get them used to processes that will help them be better developers, right? They'll produce more code, they'll be able to test more things, they'll be able to push to production faster, and be able to be more secure in the process, which is the huge difference with DevOps today is, as we talked about on a past episode, it's not DevSecOps, it's DevOps, because as a security practitioner, you're supposed to make sure that they have the right bumpers effectively in the lane so that they stay within the lines. But at the same time, they never really know that the lines are there to begin with. They just kind of follow that process because they're used to it.
Yeah, I think that was one of my big takeaways from the Phoenix Project and beyond the Phoenix Project was we've talked about the adding together development and operations and security and how we need better communication. To me, the DevOps process was really about that it's just one process and we all have input. Right. but they're not separate processes. Like when we're pushing out an application, it's got the opportunity to have security testing. It has the opportunity to make sure it's reliable from an IT ops perspective. And neither one of those groups are necessarily getting in the way. They have input, but it's just all one process. And that was, I mean, if you've read the Phoenix project, right, that was like the huge win that let them operate in a more efficient manner. Was they just streamlined that. Gene Kim talks about the value stream. They've streamlined that so that you're all just working in one process. There's still development and security and IT operations to take place, but it's all part of the same process. It's not that these groups have to collaborate and link their separate processes together. To me, that was the other big takeaway.
And so one of the things that I think about, though, when it comes to DevOps versus development styles in general, right, is not everyone is in a DevOps process, and not everyone will be able to spin up a DevOps process today with a new team. Say it's a greenfield project, for example. And so the effective way to build this from a security standpoint is to start working with those tip of the spear teams to modularize what you can actually provide back to other teams in your organization. So, for example, if they're not doing version control, you introduce version control. That's easy to do, right? But now say they're working on like actual virtual machines instead of containers. Now you have to start thinking about, okay, can we streamline the process of pushing these into the virtual machines appropriately, or doing some sort of hot swapping, for example. So in a way, it's figuring out what you can make modular in terms of your delivery from a security standpoint, and then apply the different modules to the different teams that you're going to work with. Because let's face it, in the enterprise today, you could be working with hundreds of developers on hundreds, if not thousands, of different products or software development styles or what have you. And some are using the cloud and some aren't. Some are building thick clients. Some are literally just writing a WordPress website, right? So to that end, it's a situation where you have to think about not just delivering to the tip of the spear, but the rest of the spear that follows thereafter. And you have to do that piecemeal in a lot of ways. So one of the things that I like to do in terms of working with larger organizations is doing or building a mind map. I don't know, Paul, have you ever done any mind mapping before?
Yeah, I have. Did we talk? I don't know which show I talked about this on, but there was when I was just starting out as a developer in my first job ever in in technology, really. There was like software we used to do like a mind map. And I forget what it's called to this day. And it was one of the lead developers that had showed it to me and kind of used it to map out ideas and stuff, and made parallels between like the way your brain works and the way you can map it on the software is very similar and things like that.
So for me, what I like to do in this situation is, if you are just building your application security program today in your organization, is build a mind map for those different development teams. And so there's one piece of software that I like to use on MacBook Pro. Feel free to email me if you want to know more about it. It's just hoodie@securityweekly.com. No, I don't get a kickback from this company when you ask, but there's a number of different mind map software or applications available today, whether it's Linux, Mac, Windows, or what have you. But to that end, I think that one of the first things that anyone should do is put it down and visualize it, and then share it across your organization. And it's not just who works where. It's almost a mind map of the product that they're working on, who is the owner or the most interested party in that product, in terms of like which VP thinks of this as their pet project, for example. But also then you look at, okay, who's the technical product manager and the product manager? Because those are the people that ultimately, if you want security to be part of their sprints or their development cycle, those are the people that you need to make sure are introducing it, right? You don't need to go to every single developer on that team and convince them that security is worth doing. You just need to get the product managers to say that security is worth doing, and then allocate time accordingly as part of that sprint. So it's one of those situations where with a mind map, especially good mind map software, you can then kind of heat map it in a way, right? You can say, okay, the reds are the ones that are building the most critical applications to our business in terms of the way that we make money. Maybe they are behind on their development processes or the development life cycles that they use. And maybe they're still running a lot of their stuff on, I don't know, Windows XP, for example. It's like, okay, what are the opportunities for this team, and who do I need to now talk to to see what we can do to update their processes, to update their delivery, to update the way that they do business today. And then you can map that out across your organization. And eventually what you're going to find is there are teams that you didn't even know existed that as soon as you've got a little bit of detail on them and you've shown value from what you offer as a security team for not only offering security, but offering to help development teams get better at their craft by allowing them to deliver faster to production, allowing them to quickly iterate on features. You ultimately end up being kind of told about these teams that you can then start to sort and organize inside of the mind map.
Yeah, and it's very much a part of it. I mean, there's a huge technology piece too, but there's a huge culture and social interaction piece as well. And I think the big item that I liked from your list, Keith, was if you work with the team that will latch onto new technology and implement it, work with them first and let them spread it throughout the culture and improve it with a team that's willing to work with you, easy to work with, and doesn't have like a lot of convincing. And also that technology might fit DevOps better. You know, earlier on you mentioned that not every development project certainly is going to fit neatly and nicely into a DevOps process. Everyone's a little different, but find that team where you can make those wins and start there.
Exactly. And so working with developers, I know that as security folks, we get a bad rap most of the time when it comes to working with developers. They see us coming and they want to run. But if you can be seen as an enabler to the process, so helping them be better at their craft, but also in a way, it's kind of like a dual interest, right? They're better at their craft, but it also allows them to deliver a more secure product so that they can continue to deliver features instead of bug fixes. That makes them happier as well, right? So it's a situation where you have to identify the right parties. You have to identify the right projects in terms of where to get started, how to convince the business that what you're doing is worthwhile. And then also identifying those hot spots that you may need to address a little bit more slowly. But so it's funny, there's a Chinese proverb that I like to go back to, which is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So to that end, it's like, figure out the teams that, guess what? They needed the security tree 20 years ago, but they didn't get it. So figure out the seeds that you can plant with that team today so that in the future, they will be in a good spot and you can slowly help them get there. Meanwhile, you're practicing all of those things that you want to put into use with that team, with those teams that are out there at the tip of the spear, running ahead and adjusting to these DevOps processes, because you'll have a lot of lessons learned. And also you'll be able to pick up all the new technologies that are coming out today. I think we talked about a few weeks ago, Docker's all of maybe 4 years old and Kubernetes is less than 2, it feels like. So if you're working with those teams that are at the tip of the spear, it gives you all of that knowledge from a security professional standpoint of how do I secure those things in the next 10 years or 5 years or 2 years? What other teams can I have adopt this? How would they adopt it? What's going to be beneficial to them? And then figure out all of the tools, techniques, and procedures that they will need and build runbooks or playbooks to pass off to other teams and to make them more successful in the development process and more secure by default, which is kind of a huge benefit. I don't know, Paul, if you have any last minute kind of thoughts on this topic. I did want to cover some of the learning and tools that I covered in the show notes, but any parting thoughts on this particular topic first?
Yeah, I mean, much of my presentation talks about this, and I don't want to give too much away. So,
got it. Hey, are they recording at Source Boston? Do you know if it's going to be up on YouTube?
They usually do. Yeah, they usually do.
Awesome. So we'll have to put that in the show notes when it's finally out and released. In the meantime, I thought I would cover a few interesting learning and tools that I picked up this week. So there's this one tool that I picked up called Snipe It or Snipe IT, which is an open source asset management application that I thought was really interesting. They actually have a demo that's out online. Again, it's open source, so you can use it. They do obviously have the way they make money is a hosted solution if you want to use the hosted solution. But it's asset management all the way from like the physical devices that you provisioned, the cost of those devices, who they were assigned to, but also people, right? So people as assets, right? So who they are, when they were hired, what's their phone number, things like that. And I thought it was just a really cool open source technology for people to check out because, let's face it, asset management is really, really hard. And most asset management things or tools cost a lot of money. Whereas in this case, if you are able to provision it and maintain it yourself for less, and I think of this as the sweat, blood, and tears cost as opposed to the financial cost, might be worthwhile. Paul, did you get a chance to check that out at all?
I haven't, no, and I've looked into open source asset management and inventory tools, and I haven't found one that I really like enough. I think that, you know, if you check out our interview with Leonard Rose, he on Paul Security Weekly, which was an awesome interview, by the way. Everyone should go watch that. He talks about OSSec as being his kind of open source agent of choice, which I think is kind of interesting because I've played around with OSSec recently a little bit, not a lot. I don't have as large of a deployment as Leonard was speaking of, but I was really impressed. So, and I don't know how much that helped. I mean, you know, anytime you get into agent stuff, it can be hard. There's actually an open source project from, I believe it's folks at TrustedSec that make it easier to deploy OSSec agents. So, you know, certainly that stuff that you know about. The hard part about an asset management or asset inventory is constantly discovering what you don't know about and adding that into your system.
Yeah, that's the never-ending battle, as it were. Speaking of never-ending battles, by the way, there is an open source project called Astra for automated security testing for REST APIs that I thought was another cool project out on GitHub. It's got a command line interface as well as a UI that you can go ahead and basically scan your APIs for or excuse me, your REST APIs for vulnerabilities. So I thought this was cool. It looks like it has a decent amount of coverage. Of course, no scanning solution is ever perfect per se, but to that end, you know, open source is kind of quick and easy. If you're a startup and you need to first pass to test your APIs, this might be just a good thing to just throw on and see how it works.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out,
cool.
Keith, because I'm also looking for an open source alternative for scanning your containers.
Yeah.
Which is kind of similar, right? Like I think there's a couple different aspects. Like you should be scanning your APIs, you should be scanning the containers themselves, and you should also have something that maybe interacts with your commits that is looking for open source software vulnerabilities, like we talked about with White Source. With the container stuff, I'm looking at Claire is the open source project that does it for containers. That seems to be the one that bubbles up to the top. I'll also, you know, I talk about the various approaches of commercial vendors as well, one of which is has a scanning component layered inside, a sponsor of this show, but also does the deeper, like monitoring your container environment for vulnerabilities.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's definitely necessary in today's world for those teams that are using Docker containers and are basically provisioning them from their base in a way that might not be secure. And so checking to make sure that the ones that you've built are still good is definitely important, because as much as things like, for example, Docker Hub or I think it's the Docker Store now scans those on your behalf before they even put them forward. The application that you've implemented into libraries that you've pulled down after you've done like an apt-get update may not be good. And so to that end, the base container was fine up until you introduced vulnerable versions of, you know, say Java, for example. So
yeah, or maybe you change the configuration and then there's like a SQL password sticking in there, which I've seen as well. Now, I mean, we solved that problem with Amazon RDS. Well, not really. I mean, because the password still has to be in there. We've limited it a little bit by using the serverless technology, but you know, identifying those as they crop up. Did someone make it not just a code change, but a config change? And now all of a sudden there's some kind of security problem with my container. Can they pick up on that? And I think that's important. Also, if in my build process I'm skipping the updating, like maybe I commented that apt-get update out of my Docker file, and now I'm deploying vulnerable containers, you want something in the process that's going to tell you that that happened.
Absolutely. And usually what you're going to do is you're going to set it as, you know, warnings first, and then as it makes its way from staging to production, it becomes blocking at that point. But for sure,
it should block the build. Right? Well, I mean, that's up to you what blocks a build and what doesn't. That's obviously configurable, and that's going to depend on your maturity as well.
For sure. One other person, so this is actually a person that I wanted to highlight here. So under number 3 for learning and tools is Julia Evans. She does a lot of different kind of, you know, whiteboards for a lot of different command line tools and different things that she is learning about, and actually puts together these nice little whiteboards. So this one specifically is on grep, which is probably one of the best, you know, built-in tools in Linux that exists. So it goes through kind of the flags and just other interesting stuff. Julia tends to write a lot of these for many, many different commands as she is learning them. So that is, she's on Twitter at Bork, B0RK. Go check her, go like follow her and check out some of the stuff she's putting together, because I think that Her whiteboards are incredibly useful, and grep is one of my favorite tools, so I wanted to highlight that. Real quick, before we wrap up this segment, though, I wanted to just highlight two things. First, under number 4 for learning and tools is Honeycast, or Honeycast. It's honeytrap.io, and it's effectively Twitch streaming for your honeypot. So you can kind of share the lessons learned of people that are going after your honeypot, and other people can kind of watch it to see what's going on for the behaviors that are taking place. I thought this was kind of cool. So I don't know, Paul, if you had a chance to check it out, but it's a kind of a way to share your honeypots with the world.
That's pretty cool. I have not seen that, no.
Yeah, that was something that just popped on my radar the other day. I thought that would be worth sharing with our listeners. Last one is, of course, our friends at Trusted Sec, specifically Dave Kennedy and the family over at DerbyCon, have a Slack channel. So they have a couple of different channels available for people, including selling and buying tickets, which I know is a hot topic given that tickets just went on sale and sold out on Saturday. But then also hiring, mentorship, charity, etc. I wanted to highlight this because I know that the community likes to generally join yet another Slack channel. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I think it's probably going to be one that's well traveled by many people that you probably know and follow on Twitter. So,
I joined today.
Yeah, I haven't joined yet, but I plan to in this case. So I have way too many Slack channels, though. I got to probably drop a few of these at some point. In any case, with that, we are going to take a short break and then come back for the news.